This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Sous vide, I think I'm gonna say overrated, which is not to say that sous vide isn't good. Like, sous vide is really good. It has lots of advantages, but I also think that a lot of the things that are good about sous vide are good about stewing and poaching generally, right? Like, it doesn't have to be in a bag.
I agree.
Ask Adam. Welcome everybody to Ask Adam, a very special episode. Normally my lovely wife is the person who reads your questions to me to answer. This time it's somebody else, also named Lauren though. Everyone who does this job has to be named Lauren, it's the law. So you might recall that some episodes back I encouraged everybody to fill out a survey for a video that I did about meat washing practices, and I said that of those people who filled out that survey, I would choose one to do an Ask Adam with me as a little bit of an incentive. Well, here's the winner. Congratulations.
Hello. Hi, nice to meet you.
Lauren Wilson, tell the people about yourself.
Alrighty, well, okay, yes, I am Lauren. I'm a college student. I go to Brown in Rhode Island, but currently, because of the pandemic, I'm actually at home in Michigan. And it's so funny, I just saw your serial episode that you just uploaded to your channel about Battle Creek. And I thought that only people from Michigan were proud that Kellogg was headquartered there. So definitely felt like a shout out. It was great timing.
Well, thank you for watching my programs and thank you for doing this with me today. Do we have a question?
The first thing I got was from your Instagram. Do you ever regret leaving academia to pursue YouTube? Or do you think that leaving Mercer and pursuing YouTube as a cook was the best idea in terms of your passion?
Okay, so in terms of my passions, as opposed to in terms of like, job security, providing for my family, all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yes.
No, I don't think I regret it. I think that this is like a good job for me. It allows me to combine several of the distinct things that I like to do and have some competency with. I miss the university environment in some ways. I don't miss it in others. I do not miss the the bureaucracy and the administration and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, definitely.
And when I say that, I don't mean like the people who constitute the administration. Like, I know lovely administrators at many universities. I just mean just the committee meetings, basically. Like, the things I do miss about like the college environment is honestly like being around people like you, Lauren. Like, I think I imagine you may find as you get older that like, it can feel good to hang around to be around younger people who are more energetic and less jaded,
I can see that.
It's energizing to be around people who have not been beaten down by the world yet, who have not totally sacrificed all their principles yet. I mean, they'll get there. It's on their schedule. But, it feels good to be around that kind of like energy and youthful optimism. But on the other hand, like, I don't miss, like there's a reason that you're here right now, which is that it's like, I think probably the plurality of my audience is like college age people or thereabouts. So I still am around, y'all a lot. And that's nice, but I miss, being around y'all more because y'all are, there's a reason the broader kind of culture is obsessed with youth, in particular college in particular. Like, it's a good scene. It's a good place. It's a good time of life for a lot of people. If it's not a good time of life for you right now, please don't, not you, Lauren, but whoever's watching. If you're not having a good time in college right now, please don't think that means that you're broken, that something is wrong with you, that you'll never be happy later on in your life. Because that's the dangerous thing about telling young people, like, oh, you're going to go to college, it's going to be the best time of your life. And you get there and it's not the best time of your life. And you think, or rather you get there and it's bad. You don't have a good time. You think, oh my God, this is as good as it gets. It's only downhill from here. Like, that is soul crushing, and that simply is not the case for a lot of people. I did not have a very good time in college. Lots of people don't have a very good time in college. Like, people, you'll find your time. And when you find your place in the world, tell the world about it with a website from Squarespace. Your Squarespace site can grow with you. Maybe it just starts out as a blog or a personal portfolio site, but then you want to start charging for some members-only content, you can do that. You want to put in a calendar so people can schedule appointments with you, you can just say add section and do do that. Say you want to start selling merch. You can add a store to any Squarespace template, and Squarespace handles all the credit card stuff for you. But you don't have to give your credit card to start playing with a template. You can do that right now at squarespace.com for free. But when you need to activate a premium feature or register a custom domain or make your site live, do us both a favor and use my link and code in the description. You're going to save 10%. Squarespace.com/Ragusia. Thank you, Squarespace.
And speaking of major changes, this is like more on a personal note, but my dad actually recently moved to Macon, which is really crazy.
What?
Yes, and what made me originally interested in your video, I think it must have come up, on my recommended, and then I saw Macon, and I was like, what? That's crazy. So I think that is something that definitely made me interested in you. I guess what I'm wondering, because I haven't gotten the chance to visit him yet, because he moved during the pandemic, was what's like the food scene like out there? And also, are there any like ethnic cuisines that are kind of like prominent? I know like in Metro Detroit, where I'm from, we have lots of Lebanese food and things like that.
In terms of like the food scene, I think that, the things that I have responded to the most have been the things that you would expect: the soul food scene, the barbecue scene. And then there's like things within that category that are surprising. Like we have so many vegan soul food restaurants at this point. It's a really interesting scene that I would love to kind of feature once I can be around people safely again. Just like all of the ways that you can make barbecue with jackfruit instead of pig is really interesting.
Right.
And so that's cool. But there's also, it's like the broader phenomenon, the kind of incredible flowering of food that is happening everywhere is happening here too, right? Like it used to be that like the only, good upscale restaurants were in like a handful of cities, and now like any city in the highly developed world with a population over 50,000 or something has got at least one really good, upper market restaurant. And that's awesome. And that's, the reasons for that proliferation are, I think, really complex, and it's not entirely a good story, but there's just, there's some really, really great, like, restaurants here, as there are almost everywhere now. And I think that's mostly a thing to be celebrated.
I would say so too. I think on that note, one of my follow-up questions for that is, I think for the future of your channel, do you ever see yourself wanting to potentially travel to any of these cities? I think large or small, kind of hole in the wall or not.
Yeah, absolutely. My business plan that I had made when I quit my teaching job to do this full time was all about me like traveling at least once a month to go do a field shoot. And then like a month later, COVID happened. And so here we are.
Of course.
So I'm so jazzed for everybody to get the damn vaccine, and I can start, getting on a plane and going places and putting my camera on things, because I'm really sick of putting my camera on things within these four walls and people within these four walls. I'm sick of myself is basically what it boils down to. I'm really tired of editing this face. I look forward to editing your face, Lauren.
I think that I definitely think about that, because I've been watching YouTube since I was 6 years old. I'm truly like one of the people that grew up on YouTube. And so I'm like, I can't imagine editing myself like for probably dozens of hours, like, every month anyway.
It's super weird. And it's one of the worst parts of the job. Like it's like, because especially like, I think if you're a person who's really, really into your appearance, maybe that's not so torturous, but like I'm someone who has tried to ignore my physical appearance most of my life, right? On the other hand, I think in some ways it's actually helped me like bust through some barriers there.
I can see that.
What do they call that? Like immersion therapy for phobias, like if you're scared of spiders, drop them in a pit of spiders, right? Like I have been dropped into a pit of spiders having to edit my own damn face. On the other hand, it has also made me more self-conscious about certain other things, because it's like when you look at footage of yourself taken at least once a week, every week, you see how much your appearance actually like vacillates and changes on a moment-to-moment basis. Like in particular, in response to like I've learned how much your appearance, or at least I shouldn't universalize my experience, but I mean how much my appearance changes in response to what I've eaten in the last 24 hours or so, right? Like if I've had a lot of pizza,
Oh,
between the water retention from the sodium and the glycogen from the excessive carb intake, like my cheeks just swell up like balloons, and I look,
oh my
and people
goodness,
will
same.
comment on my videos and be like, oh, hey, oh, Adam, boy, he's been eating too many brownies, or the inverse, boy, Adam's looking shredded. And it's like, dude, my body composition is like identical. It's just the only difference is how much junk I ate in the last 24 hours. If I ate a lot of junk in the last 24 hours, I'm puffy. If I didn't, I'm not. And I think that's probably true for everyone, but we're just not aware of it because we don't normally have to contemplate our own faces as much as I have to contemplate mine.
No, that's really interesting. And I think speaking of, I guess then like kind of like food trends, because I know healthy food and like things like that, like appearance, perceiving ourselves, I feel like that's definitely big right now, especially on TikTok. So I
Yeah.
guess in one, or at least like in a couple words, what do you think about these few food trends? I have three of them. Do you think they're overrated or underrated? So first I have sous vide, and then also air fryers and just the general concept of superfoods.
Sous vide, I think I'm going to say overrated. I think a lot of which is not to say that sous vide isn't good. Like sous vide is really good. It has lots of
It is.
advantages. But I also think that a lot of the things that are good about sous vide are good about stewing and poaching generally, right? Like it doesn't have to
Mm.
be in a bag.
I agree.
Unfortunately, I mean, I think this is chiefly about meat. I mean, sous vide's primary utility is meat, so I'm going to talk about meat. Like one of the great things about sous vide for cooking meat, is that it's like you can, wrap up a piece of meat, you can stick it into a water bath with an immersion circulator, maintaining a constant temperature, and then it's physically impossible to overcook it. You set the temperature of the water to like 140 Fahrenheit or whatever like target internal temperature you have for your meat, and it because of the laws of thermodynamics, like the temperature inside the meat cannot exceed the temperature outside the meat. And once it comes to thermal equilibrium, right? So, and that's awesome. That's great. But that has been true of poaching forever. Forever, right? Poaching is a great and easy way to cook. Now, if you have a gas stove, it's pretty easy to maintain a constant temperature with a resistance coil. You've got the cycling on and off thing to kind of contend with, so you could have spikes in temperature. But generally, especially if you're using like a heavy bottomed pot, like that sort of the mass of the pot serves as a kind of regulator valve on those fluctuations of heat from the cycling resistance coil, and as a result, like you can maintain a pretty damn steady temperature of 140 in your poaching liquid in the pot. Like it doesn't have to be in a bag. Just put the meat in a pot with some liquid. It's great. It's been great for thousands of years. Like, do you want to weigh in, Lauren? Go ahead.
No, I've seen it blow up, and like just even like sous vides that were like the immersion cookers that were online have like they've really gone down in price. I feel like people like everywhere like I got to get my hands on one. So I was just wondering, because I know it's great for people that are maybe afraid of meat, but I'm not afraid of handling meat. So
Well, I hadn't thought of it, that dimension of it, Lauren, until you said it just now. Is that like it's sanitizing, right? It's like for people who are increasingly divorced from the messy realities of our life as corporeal beings, right? Like it's like people want shrink wrapped everything nowadays, and sous vide is part of that broader phenomenon. I had not considered that until you said it.
and then I guess the next one is just the air fryer.
I refuse to say the name because I think the name is dumb. It is a tabletop convection oven, is what it is. But strip that away, and I think they're awesome. And if I were you, Lauren, like if I was a college student, I think that would be my chief axe, right? Like I would cook primarily with my air fryer if I was
Mm.
only feeding myself and maybe one other person most of the time in a small space without much money. 100%, I would be using my tabletop convection oven.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I haven't gotten one just because my apartment is literally so small and I have no more counter space to put another appliance. The coffee machine is my main concern.
A person has to have priorities. I mean, really.
Yeah, I definitely want to get one, probably post grad. We'll see, we'll see. And then the next one I think is just superfoods because I definitely got into them at one point. I feel like, again, YouTube, food media, and then now I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe I should just, eat what I want. What are you thinking though?
What kinds of things were you seeking out and eating on the basis of their superness?
Well, I'm thinking about things like goji berries, maca powder, the hemp seeds of the world, all of those sorts of things that cost like $15 that you have to order online.
It's such a complicated topic because like each one of these things is its own thing, and some of their sort of super reputations are more
True.
substantiated by available research than others, right? Um, but I think it's in general. I mean, I think there's some good things about the trends in the sense that it's good to sort of have some kind of impetus to expose yourself to something new, to go outside your comfort zone and try something that you wouldn't have normally, right? That's always good. But like it's from the millions of conversations I have all the time with all kinds of food and nutrition professionals, scientists, physicians, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, they all will, most of them will say the same thing, which is that it's just people, that it all causes people to lose the forest for the trees, right? People will think like, oh, I'm going to have like this purple food that has antioxidants in it, and I'm going to really seek it out, right? While I continue to like shove other carcinogens down my throat, like while like it's the benefit that you're going to get from the acai berry or whatever is really really tiny compared to the detriment you're doing by eating, fast food and drinking alcohol, right? Like, and I love to drink alcohol. I think alcohol is awesome, right? But alcohol is bad for you. Like the clear scientific consensus is like there's no healthy amount. Okay, it has no the whole all the studies that you might have read in the past about alcohol, like drinkers living longer and being healthier. Like those were studies that did not sufficiently disentangle drinking from other behaviors like having friends and doing things that are fun, right? Which those things do make you live longer and they are correlated with drinking alcohol,
Hmm.
but it's not the alcohol that's making you live longer, it's the friends that you make. It's the social support system that you build. It's the fact that you give yourself time to relax and all that kind of stuff, or that you have the privilege to relax, right? So like alcohol is a class 1 carcinogen, right? And I drink it anyway because life is choices, and choices are where we balance competing interests, right? And I think you don't. There's persuasive arguments to be made for not always doing the healthiest thing, right? Like I mean that video that I just did about John Harvey Kellogg and like his entire philosophy of self-denial that really, I think, crossed the line into masochism. I mean, quite clearly, right? Sadism, really.
Yeah.
And not only in terms of his treatment of himself, but also his treatment of his patients, right? And so, like, yeah, like longevity is not the only goal, right? Who wants to live forever if life is hell, right?
True.
If like the logic is, well, I can completely have a hellish experience for these 80 years or whatever that I'm alive, but then I get to have a fantastic eternity. Like that's a reasonable argument, right? Assuming that you believe that afterlife exists. But if you don't, then it makes no sense at all. So anyway, getting back to your question, Lauren, your excellent question. I think it's like, what all of these professionals would tell you and what they have told me anytime I've asked them about this kind of stuff is like, please do not get focused on that kind of crap because it's going to keep you from paying attention to like what's actually really affecting what the much bigger and more important parts of your diet.
That definitely makes sense. Okay, and then I think just be quickly because I also am interested in continuing the conversation regarding just like honestly meat and meat taboos and all those things. But before we get to that, I'm actually really interested like just because, speaking of this hell that we're living in right now, in this pandemic, in this moment, I'm wondering, as a sad college student, what do you think should be the building blocks for people that are struggling to feed themselves right now? And not in like, in both a financial, I guess, and just a depression, deployment.
Wow. Well, this may sound to be in contradiction with what we were just talking about, but like I based upon like my analytics and where I see like my views are coming from, the countries and all that kind of the demographics, it's like I operate on the assumption that most of the people hearing my voice, our voices right now, you and me, Lauren, most of the people hearing us are people who have a problem of eating too much food as opposed to too little food, right? I assume that most of you are kind of overfed first
Mm.
worlders like me. And so if you're not, please ignore what I'm about to say because it doesn't apply to you. But if you are, and I think I'm complicit in perpetuating this. I mean, the whole kind of concept of like comfort eating is really that's overrated. That's an overrated food trend, right? Overeating usually like makes us less happy, and it we feel like it's going to, and it often does in the very immediate sense, but eating too much damn food and too much unhealthy damn food, like there's large volumes of research showing it, like it makes us less happy, not just because of like body image and all that kind of crap, but like in terms of like more immediate kind of biochemical ways, like the insulin response that we get from having way too many refined carbs in one sitting, like that makes you ornery and cranky, right? That's like a real thing that I know I experience a whole lot. Like if I have a whole bunch of sugar in a couple hours, I feel bad. I feel like emotionally bad. And then it gets you, and then you go like hypoglycemic and you feel sort of bad physically too. And then what do? You eat more sugar in order to satisfy that temporary need, and thus you're on the carb train, right? And you can't get off. It's this addictive cycle that is really akin to all kinds of other addictive cycles that people suffer from in their lives. And so, honestly, like my advice is like try to get away from that kind of comfort eating thing. Like eat a little bit more of be a bit more of an aesthete, right? So like I've been eating a lot better for the last couple of weeks, and I feel way better psychologically right now than I did before. And I don't know how many times I have to go through that kind of yo-yoing in my life before I freaking remember that and learn the damn lesson, right? But like when I eat way too much junk, especially way too many simple carbs, I am emotionally bad. And when I have a cleaner diet, more fruits and vegetables and complex carbohydrates, and really just kind of watching overall caloric intake, I am emotionally better. And I think that like the thing that we've done in our society where like we've reacted against kind of fat shaming and fat phobia and all that kind of stuff, like that's all really good and important. But I think it's also important to not like kind of overcorrect a little bit and remember that like, eating way too much junk really does do meaningful bad things to you, totally apart from like, fascistic body image crap that we're all indoctrinated with.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And especially with the whole like restrict binge cycle that a lot of people find themselves in, the diet culture definitely doesn't help when people want to just comfort eat a little bit. Then you feel bad about it. So, anyway, we won't get any further into it. But no, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, just kind of thinking food is fuel. Food is fuel. Am I right? But no, that makes sense. I think the next thing that I was interested in, because when you were talking about kind of the vegan soul food scene that was in Macon. Those are some of my favorite restaurants here in Detroit. And I was actually wondering, like, just your thoughts on like the way that like the vegan movement could be going in the next few years. I'm really interested in the whole idea of like a flexitarian personally, and like just people eating less meat in general. But
Yeah, it's obviously an incredibly charged subject. And my goal in answering your totally fair question right now, Lauren, is to kind of like restrict the scope of it a little bit because I don't want to. I mean, A, we could talk forever. B, I want to not get into too much trouble.
that makes sense.
So So I think it's the case is pretty clear that less meat eating is good in almost every way. It's and that which is not to say that like foods that you could replace meat with in your diet aren't couldn't also be physically injurious to you and injurious to the environment and all kinds of stuff like that. Like they can. Like it matters what you replace it with in your diet. But like the case is pretty, that in aggregate, if you look at what people eat instead, if they reduce meat or like it's a good thing for them physically and for the sustainability of agriculture, right? So eating less meat is something that I have, strived to do for many years and have succeeded. Like we eat way less meat than we used to, and try to look at it as a special treat rather than a staple food. Or looking at it alternatively, looking at it the way that meat eating has historically been for like most of the history of civilization, where like meat is more of a flavoring, right? And in fact, you see this in lots of extant food cultures today, especially in East Asia and some other places where it's just like why am I looking a field right here in the American South? Like the ham hock in the pot of greens is the perfect example, right? Where meat is used to help cook and to help flavor very, very large volumes of plant matter, very, very small amounts of meat. And that's a perfectly good, great way to eat too. And a lot of those foods are really good and kind of underrated, I think. The whole like giant slab of pure animal protein thing is kind of a historical aberration and really should be viewed at as a special treat, I think. I think the case for that is super strong. In terms of like veganism in particular, I don't know, that's a more kind of complicated topic, and I'm sort of more interested to know what you make of it, Lauren.
Well, this is like really funny because at school, before the pandemic, I was actually in a vegan vegetarian co-op. I myself am not vegan or vegetarian, and nor do I plan on ever going vegan or vegetarian. But it really introduced me to a bunch of like produce and like just other plant proteins that I never tried before. Like I just didn't really grow up eating things like lentils and fennel and things like that. So it was all like farm fresh and local, so kind of cool, and it was dirt cheap, which is really why I participated. But no, it was really cool. So but I think like a lot of people, they would talk about things like animal rights and stuff at the co-op, but I remember just being like, I definitely feel where you're coming from, but that's just won't be me. But I think that I eat way less meat on average than I did before I started college. And I feel like if everyone made that transition, maybe things would be better.
It's interesting to hear what you say about how like it forced you to kind of open up to new ideas, and that's something that like you see both from a culinary standpoint and from like a human health standpoint, is that like when people go on any kind of restricted diet, they cut out X, whatever the hell X is. Interesting and usually good things happen, right? It causes you, so it's just cutting out one category of food reduces some amount of temptation in your life, right? Like when you're just kind of walking around and this is not a good example for COVID times, but in the before times, when there would be like buffets or parties or just like food out somewhere, if you have told yourself that you cannot eat some broad category of stuff that might be found on that table, right? The likely outcome is that your net intake of food is going to be lower. So basically what they find, a lot of the research finds is that basically any kind of diet, restricted diet, works in terms of weight loss, and so that's an interesting example there. And then from the culinary perspective, yeah, like anything that you do, any arbitrary thing that you cut out is going to force you to kind of look around for things to replace it, and you can discover all kinds of great things that you just had no idea that you would have liked. But they're great, and your life is richer for them. So it's good to hear that you've had that experience.
Yeah, no, it was definitely cool. I think that like more people should learn about, or at least more like Americans at least, I feel like should learn about the power of beans and just like kind of rediscovering different ways to have them. So no, that's definitely where I was coming from with that. I feel like now I know about so many different foods that I didn't even know about. So that's kind of where that was coming from. And then oh, yes. The next thing that I was interested in, because people also, I know Americans also, I feel like it's like beef, poultry, and pork are like the main things that people eat here. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on like other, like alternative meats, just like how people in other cultures have them and kind of the like people rag on other cultures for the animals that they eat.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic that I've thought of several kind of video ideas that I want to do that are down that rabbit hole. All of the weird
Mm.
taboos and all that kind of stuff, and how did we land historically? How did we land on beef, chicken, pork as like the big three in the United States? And it's like, and the thing is that it's like, from having studied the topic a little bit, like, it's ask yourself why people eat what they do, where they do. Usually it's because it's what grows well there, right? Or it's what you can produce efficiently wherever the hell they are. That's almost always cause number one for why people eat what they do. And the exception, and this is not at all an exception here with the case in the United States, that like, cows are relatively economical to raise here, as are chickens, as are pigs. And so that's like the chief thing. But yeah, it's also about like kind of taste, and certainly, the meat industry certainly showed a trajectory toward less intensely tasting meats for a long time, right? Like I wonder how many people watching this right now who have heard the term gamey in reference to the taste of meat, like even know what that is. Like, can you conjure a taste memory in your head about what gaminess is? I mean, can you, Lauren?
I think like I definitely have like a spectrum of gamey-er meats that I've had. So, I mean, again, are they even gamey? I don't know. But I think of like rabbit or like like kind of like goat or something like that when I think of gamier meats.
Yeah. But like a lot of people watching this right now have never had duck or goat, right? And I wonder if they could even know what meat can taste like
Mhm.
when it's not the kind of meat that has had a lot of specifically its odorants kind of bred out of it, basically. I remember I had a really formative experience about that when I was sometime in my 20s. I forget what it was, but I was cooking Thanksgiving dinner, and I went to like this hipster butcher shop, and I was like, all right, yeah, give me like the heritage breed turkey. And the dude was like, you sure? Like he was like he looked at this boy and he was like, it was like, are you sure you can handle this, young man? Right? Um, and I was like, oh hell yeah, right? And I cooked it, and like the smell that it filled the house with was like incredible. And I thought that I'd done something wrong. I thought that I'd accidentally left the liver in there or something like that. But no, like that's gaminess. And those are specifically, they're like odor compounds that like have, that breeders of meat animals have selected against, not just recently, but for generations. And that's interesting, especially considering that, like, while some of them, I don't like, some of them I love. Like, freaking love sheep. Like, mutton, the meat of an adult sheep, freaking amazing. Like, goat, oh my God, I love it. And I feel like we're missing out on not having a lot of that, not having, quickly available here. Though it's like, it's really, people, of course, you can get everything on the internet nowadays, but there's an expense in having it shipped to you. It's if you have not been to local non-Western markets in your community, please go and try and like look in the frozen meat section, and you can find all kinds of wonderful treasures if you want to kind of broaden your horizons there. And then lastly, I think, you know, certainly there's the kind of humanitarian view of the issue that like there's certain animals whom most humans have reconciled themselves to the idea of killing to eat, and there's other animals that they have not reconciled themselves to that idea. And we can talk all day about whether or not those disparities are logical, and that's a very complicated and thorny topic. But if you do eat meat, I would encourage all of us to be open to the idea that just because it's not a cow doesn't mean that it's more cruel. And for example, like my neighbor down the street, Wilson, he's a young guy, he's a kid. So he shot a deer and he gave me some stew meat from the deer, and I'm going to cook it in a video coming up soon. And I know that people will freak out a little bit. And what I would say is that like the moral equation of deer hunting is interesting and probably has more nuance than you might realize. Like, for example, even if like you are suspicious of the impulse to hunt and people who do that, it's also the case that like human beings have caused this horrible explosion in specifically white-tailed deer populations here in North America, right? Deer are an edge species. They thrive in basically like the interface between a forested area and a grassy area. That is where they do well. And human beings in our development of the wilderness and chopping up forest into ever tiny, weirder, chunks that look like gerrymandered congressional districts, right? We have created huge amounts of edge and urban-rural interface and all that kind of stuff, where deer naturally do really, really well. And as a result, deer populations are so much bigger than they should be, both in terms of ecological health, like it's bad for other species for deer to be so overpopulated. It's also like bad for like humans. Like, I mean, I don't know what it was like growing up in Michigan for you, Lauren. I imagine it might have been similar. I grew up in Pennsylvania where like the hazard of deer strike when you're driving is a huge thing.
Absolutely.
Like so many kids, there were kids in my high school who died,
Oh, yes.
hitting deer. The worst car accident I've ever been in my life, I was 17.
Wow.
And I swerved to avoid a deer that was right in the middle of the road. And I totaled my car and really could have died. And like, it's like they are a major threat to human safety. And I think that, I am personally grateful to people working to, it's a human problem and it requires a human solution, a human intervention. And maybe hunting isn't the most humane way to do it. There are other ways that people have been exploring, and that's a debatable topic. But regardless, we need fewer deer in this world because we screwed it up. Humans screwed it up. And if we're gonna kill them, then I do think we should eat them. Like the ecological case for doing that is unassailable, right? Like how is it better to kill the deer and then throw it away and then have someone else kill a cow for you elsewhere and then ship it, across the country to you on a carbon emitting means of conveyance, and then you eat that instead? How is that better? No, eat the damn deer.
I love it. Yeah, and I think like as someone from Michigan where opening day is like a holiday here.
She means hunting season for people who didn't grow up in that, a first day of hunting season.
Yes. No, I mean like truly like in schools, I remember like I went to go to do like my like testing or whatever, just even at schools, people would be like, "Oh, for show and tell, like here's a photo of like the deer I shot with my dad." And I was like, "Oh, okay, great." And so yeah, I don't come from a hunting family, but yeah, I feel like I will gladly try some venison if it will help the earth and things like that. And I definitely have almost been in a couple of car accidents because of deer. So definitely, they're just in our backyards here in Michigan. So I feel like a lot of people can probably relate to that.
People are probably commenting right now about the Lyme disease hazard posed by deer as well, and then that's going to result in incredibly furious subthreads because there's a lot of scientific debate about the extent to which deer are actually vectors of Lyme disease. So if you're going to have that debate in the comments, have fun. I am walking the other way.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And also, a fun fact about me, I'm actually a history and an East Asian studies major here at Brown. And so, like, I've definitely also had that, like, on an intellectual level, had the debate about, the hierarchies of different meats, or especially the morality of, eating pet animals or domesticated animals that we normally would have in our home. So, again, won't get too into it, but I definitely agree. I think a lot of it is very culturally kind of influenced for people. Um, but yeah, I think honestly, like one of my biggest questions that I have, and maybe you've answered this before, so sorry if I'm repeating, is I'm wondering, like, just for all of the research that you do for your videos, like, where do you do it, or like do you have a systematic like process for conducting it? And I'm also just wondering, like, do you just have like a personal like JSTOR account or something, or like just like subscriptions to different journals? Because it seems really high level.
Yeah. So in terms of access to scholarly journals that are paywalled, I don't subscribe to anything. I pay for articles on a per article basis. If there was kind of if there was one thing that I could pay for an umbrella subscription that would get me access to most of the scientific literature I need, I would totally do it. But there isn't, as far as I can tell. So
Mm.
I made the decision a while ago to simply pay on a per article basis. And for people who have not done this before, if you're buying personal access to one like scientific journal article, the cost is generally going to be like between 30 and $60 for that. Just to download a PDF of a journal article. And for me, because it's part of my business, like it's a no-brainer. That's like it's a great use of money. It's perfectly justified. It's a write-off. Like it's fine. Um, uh, and I don't know. I mean, this is part of like a broader thing that I might say that like I don't know. Doing this has helped me. There's some things that like I wish I would have been more liberal about paying for most of my life that I was too stingy about, that I've become more liberal about as a result of doing what I do for a living and having it be very financially successful, right? So for example, like I now have so many iPhone chargers, right? Like I just have chargers all over the house, right? And and the reason that I kind of justify it to myself now is like, well, listen, this is what I need in order to do my work, right? So I just bought the chargers, right? But like thinking back to how much of my life I spent having like one frayed ratty charger in one room that I would have to move around constantly, like it's so dumb. Like and if you're a person who like legitimately cannot afford the like $100 to get like, three more chargers, right? Then I'm not trying to like shame you or anything like that. Like you got to do what you can do with what you have. But like I imagine that probably most people watching this like actually could afford to buy like two more chargers, and then have like so that you're not having to move them from like room to room in the house, and you're not wasting so much of your life trying to find it and all that kind of stuff, right? Like I just really wish that I had given myself permission to just buy more of the basic things that I need in order to function for back in the before times of my life. And buying a journal article that I need is kind of an example of that, right? Like I think about like what would I have done in the past if I really needed the information in that article, and I simply didn't allow my mind to even be open to the possibility of just paying for it, right? I wouldn't have even considered that. What would I have done instead? Like I probably would have just spent hours and hours and hours trying to find it for free somewhere. And was that really a good use of my time? Like I probably could have made $30 in that time, right? So anyway, that was such a tangent to your question. But yeah, I just pay for them. Like, and people have taken my practice in that regard as indication that as sort of tacit acceptance or embrace or approval of the academic publishing industrial complex. And please do not interpret it as such. I believe that is a really messed up system. I think that, I love the open access movement in academic publishing, which for people who are not part of this world, that basically just means like people like Lauren's professors at Brown increasingly publishing their scholarship not at the traditional journal publications, but with open access journals that are just online and free. And they're usually taking a hit in terms of prestige when they do that, because there's a lot more prestige in publishing in the Journal of the American Medical Association than there is in your typical medical open access journal, right? But they're doing it for the cause of open access and kind of breaking out of a system that really does like extract a lot of, of profit for a select few people out of both the work of scholars and also the work of you, the taxpayer, who pays for a lot of the scientific research that ends up going into those journals. Either directly or indirectly, you pay for a ton of that. So no, I think it's like a messed up system. On the other hand, I actually don't think it's like completely illegitimate, right? Like professional journals are good in some, like I think the gatekeeping role of professional journal editors is important and valuable, and somebody has to pay for them, right? So I think about them when I pay. I think, oh, okay, well, somebody's got to pay for the parts of this industrial complex that are actually valuable, and it might as well be me. If it's not going to be me, who the hell is it going to be, right? So I just pay for them. Sorry, is there any more specific question about my research process I should have answered?
Honestly, no, I think that that's fine with me. It is funny though, as an undergrad student who's like probably the target demographic for people they're trying to rip off. I guess if your university doesn't have a subscription, I haven't paid for a PDF in years, so hopefully it'll stay that way.
Yeah, dude. I mean, if you're a college student watching, please
I have the cheat codes.
remember that you presently have access to an incredibly expensive wealth of knowledge,
Honestly.
right? Like your library, your login at your school library's website gives you access to an unbelievable trove of human knowledge that you will not have access to after you
Yes.
graduate. Like, so if you're inclined to take advantage of that, take advantage of it. It's pretty special. It's
Download
pretty
your
awesome.
PDFs before you graduate, folks. Anyway, that's my message to the people. I guess the last thing that I have, when you're talking about especially like just like money or like things that like you wish you had invested in, or investments, I would say, I guess for small creators, because I saw on your Instagram post a couple people wanted like tips for smaller creators starting out. What are some of the like, I'm trying to think of like the key equipment, I would say, or like the key things that you think have really enhanced your process. Just like even not the most important things, but I guess the things that come to mind. So even like as small as like chargers, like is there anything else like that?
So my basic equation that I feel that I have learned since doing this is that lighting is more important than cameras. Here, here, let me take my phone. I will drop this in right now. Gonna put it on widescreen mode and people can see. All right, there's Lauren. Wave to people. All right, so there she is. So here I'm gonna pan across what I'm seeing. And there's the lights and blah, blah. Okay, and then there's my camera, which is like, that's a $5,000 camera with a $2,000 lens on it. And that might be intimidating to you, but please don't be intimidated by that. Like, this would look almost as good if I just had my iPhone up there. Really, I mean, what has a much bigger effect on the quality of what you are seeing right now is these very inexpensive things. So all of this foam that I have scattered everywhere, okay? The number one worst thing about amateur media projects is how you can't understand what the hell people are saying. And that will improve your sound tremendously by, in this case, what it's doing is it's limiting echoes, which is a particular challenge for me shooting in a kitchen. Kitchens and bathrooms have lots of very smooth surfaces on them to enable easy cleaning, right? But the problem with them is that they're very reflective of sound. And so, yeah, before I shoot, I scatter a whole bunch of foam around. Specifically, I scatter it in the direction in which I am talking, because that's where it will absorb it and keep it from getting bounced around elsewhere, right? So like the foam is more important than the camera, and the lights are way more important than the camera. Like, and I'm not one to give, I'm not a person who should be giving advice on lighting. I still struggle with lighting all the time. It's really, really hard for me. But there's a million YouTube tutorials to watch, and you can do amazing cinematic lighting with just like the lamps that you already have in your house. So 100% focus on that. Most people have a fantastic camera with them. Most people watching this right now have a fantastic camera already. Work with this before you work with anything else is definitely my advice. The only real challenge for like a YouTuber trying to shoot with a phone is the fact that, the phone is here and the microphone is in the same place. And so to put the phone where you need it to be, the microphone is often not as close as you'd want it to the source of the sound. Like in my case, my microphone is here, taped under my shirt and going to a completely different audio recorder. But it's like, so how do you resolve that? Well, there's lightning cable lavalier microphones just like that you can buy for like, you can buy them for like $30. And that's an option. Another option is to have a friend who has a phone, and a roommate who has a phone, and you take this phone, put it up on your tripod over there. You take your friend's phone and you put it right there, and the friend's phone is recording the audio, your phone is recording the video, and then you sync them up in post-production afterwards, which is much easier than it sounds. And again, download a YouTube tutorial, but that's super easy. So yeah, my advice. I mean, I loved creating media for so much of my career, working for nonprofits and public broadcasting and stuff, and like making do and being scrappy with like, little cheap things, because it's kind of fun. It's amazing what you can do. Which is not to say that like expensive cameras don't have their virtues. They do, but like there's definitely like a law of diminishing returns, right? Like the difference between an iPhone and a $5,000 camera is like this. And the difference between having a lamp positioned in a good spot or not is this. It's this, right? It's just like, hey, this is how we get closure to the conversation. This is, our arc is about to round. Watch me do it, Lauren. It's just like eating acai berries or whatever, superfood, right? Like, yes, it probably is good for you, but it is an infinitesimally smaller factor than whether or not you're drinking and eating fries all the time.
No, okay, that definitely makes sense. And honestly, like I feel like both me and like my brother we're both college students and like interested in YouTube as well. And like honestly, this is pretty helpful, especially as someone that like, you have a media background, but like in terms of the videography aspect of it, like that's different. So no, that's pretty helpful, I would say. I think those are the end of my my specific questions, but thanks so much for like just talking with me today and reaching out. This is so cool.
Thank you, Lauren. Can I ask you one more question before we quit?
Absolutely.
So tell me about the Dream Cafe. Like, what's going to be on the menu? What kind of drinks?
Oh my goodness.
Walk me through it.
Just like, so I worked at a cafe during college, so that totally influenced me. But I love like very pretty aesthetic things like lavender London fogs and like, just like kind of like fluffy pancakes and just like little summery drinks like with ginger and lemon and like edible flowers, little dainty things like that. I feel like after this pandemic, we need some things that are just for how pretty it is and how nice it is. So that's kind of where I think I want to go one day.
That sounds like exactly the kind of food I would love to pay someone else to make for me.
Yes.
So I really look forward to going to your place and paying you to do that work so that I don't have to.
I want it to be something that like is familiar to people, but something that you would never be able to recreate, if that makes sense. So like your traditional pound cakes or just like little small desserts and stuff like that. So yeah. Well, anyway, thanks. That's the dream, you guys. Stay tuned one day. And hopefully it'll come to fruition. But yeah, I think that's it though. But this is so cool.
Good times. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks for watching.